This statistic terrified me. Definite evening types are at a 10% increased risk of all-cause mortality. What? Hello gorgeous people, what is up and welcome back to my channel. I am back with another Science Explained video this week and it is a good one. This week I'm going to be talking to you guys about whether you're a night person or a morning person, why that is, what that means, and do we have any control over it. This week's video is also really exciting because we're going to be talking about the different personality types that come with morning persons. Morning people versus evening people. It's a good start. What that means for you in your everyday life. This video idea came to me after I did the 6 a.m. club. I joined the 6 a.m. club for a week and I got my ass handed to me. It was so freaking difficult and I got ill like a week after I was done. No. Okay, so the first thing I decided to look at within the research was the reason for being night owls. I have been a night owl my entire life and I have never once had any issue with staying up late with really good focus to work or study or meet a deadline, whereas I do have issue doing those things in the morning. I was honestly really disappointed to see that when I first started to Google was that night owls are night owls because they eat late and they expose themselves to light late in the evening and therefore it's pushed their circadian rhythm back, so that's why they're night owls. Now I immediately knew that this wasn't the truth. It was time to dig a little bit deeper into the research and my god, do I have some answers for you. Now before we jump into all of the research articles, I do just want to give my first impressions of the list of personality types and medical risks that night owls and morning people are either predisposed to or at risk of. So I had a little read of scientific journals and articles that come up really close to the top of these kind of search terms. What information is being fed to you? How accurate is it? And what kind of damage might that be doing to people who receive the information incorrectly? The general vibe we got from the research was morning people are generally children and adults, and teenagers are normally night owls. Any adults who are night owls are most likely to be male. Everyone has a circadian clock of 24 hours. However, if it's slightly shorter, then you're more likely to be a morning person, and if it's slightly longer, then you're more likely to be an evening person or a night owl. This is where it gets a bit rubbish for night owls, so buckle in if you think you are one. The research said to me at the beginning that night owls are more likely to be depressed, have a higher dependence on caffeine, more likely to drink alcohol, but they tend to be more focused as the day goes on, whereas early morning people or morning larks are more likely to be less engaged as the day goes on. Good news if you're a morning person, apparently you have better sleep, more regular sleep patterns, more flexible personalities, and you're happier and healthier. Now it's important to note here that I didn't just look on like a Healthline bullet point list. I actually went and found something that was credited. So this was written by someone who works at Brown University and has a PhD. So if you were looking for scientific research or something along that basis in terms of educating yourself, this was something you were going to find very, very easily. And when I read it, well, my first impression was rude. Like, excuse me? It was a depressing little article to read, I'll be honest. And when I was done, my first impression was bullshit. Calling bullshit. No way did I believe that it was just, if you're a night owl, then this is what you're going to be at higher risk of. And so I did more research. You guys, I'm so excited about today. Like, this is gonna be so good. So one of the very interesting things that I read at the beginning of my research was the Handbook of Sleep Research. I learned so much from reading this handbook, and so much was uncovered to me about morning people and night people that made so much sense. Like, I read through some of it and I was like, that's a behavior that's linked with what time you get out of bed in the morning. I've always wondered why I do that. It was really interesting. Go and have a little read. I will link it in the description bar below for you, and it might give you some insight into you and your behaviors that you might be able to use to your advantage. One of the first things that I understood and learned from reading the handbook really helped me with my future research, and that was the term chronotype. So chronotype basically just means if you're a morning person or an evening person. That is it. Don't be scared by this word. It's gonna come up lots in the rest of this video. If you're a morning lark, you are called a morning chronotype, and if you're a night owl, you're called a late chronotype. This handbook also did support what I had already read about how morning types are normally adults and children, and evening types are normally people who are teenagers. Now, this seems to last until your early 20s, and then as your 20s progressively go on, you become more and more of a morning person. I myself am 24, turning 25 next month. Can't wait to party. But I'm finding myself there's not much change in my relationship with morning time and nighttime. Maybe that will change more. Maybe when they say as you go through your 20s, they don't mean 21 to 24, they mean 24 to 30. It was also supported that men have later chronotypes than women, and unfortunately it did support that later chronotypes have higher risk of poor physical health and higher mortality rates. Now, if you're a night owl and you're watching this, don't go freaking out yet. Like I said, the amazing study that I've been looking at for God knows how long is going to explain a lot of this in not too long. One of the things that really red flagged this for me as someone who is used to reading research papers and finding where those flaws are and those niggly bits that don't quite make sense was cause and effect. I didn't believe that because you're born a night owl, you are gonna have poor physical health. I think what was more likely is that the people who have poor physical health a lot of the time are going to be identified as lazy people. Lazy people don't tend to get out of bed very early in the morning. So I think maybe that was swaying the research in a way that wasn't very valid or accurate. And so I was excited to go have a dig around in more research and properly review it. Personality type was another thing that was mentioned within the studies that I first looked at, and basically the general trend was that morning people were more conscientious, whilst evening types were more open, they were more extroverted, but they also showed more apathetic, volatile and disinhibited personality types. Not great. Also, compared to morning types, evening types show greater, wait, I have to read this because I honestly can't say it. Cyclothymic and euphoric tendencies. What does this mean? So, if you have cyclothymia, you have periods of feeling low followed by periods of extreme happiness and excitement. It's called hypomania, and when you don't need much sleep and you feel like you have a lot of energy. So this was a bit of an eye-opener and a cool thing to learn for me, because yeah, sometimes I go to bed and then I become the most excited person on the planet, bouncing off the walls, so much energy, and it has a name. And it's very common in night owls. And then euphoria is a pleasant emotional state that is not a mental condition on its own, but it is a symptom or a sign of other medical conditions. If I remember correctly, I think it was bipolar and possibly schizophrenia. Night owls were also perceived of having greater risk-taking, trait impulsivity, sensation-seeking, and preference for present versus future. I disagree with this in one way, and I agree with it in another way. The first way that I disagree with it is that I think, or I used to think about the future all the time. I try and do it less now because nothing goes to plan. What the fuck is life? However, I do kind of get what they're saying in terms of maybe when doing an action, night owls are more impulsive. So if they're thinking about the after effects less, then that's going to be an easier behavior to exhibit. Whereas I feel that people who are more future based, they won't do risk-taking behaviors because they're so worried about the possible outcome. I'd be a bit more like, that's future Alicia's problem.
You know who I think could handle a problem like that? Who? Future Ted and future Marshall.
Now this is so much information, I know, but please stick with me because it is about to get really, really good. Let's address some of the health risks that are thrown out very easily to people who are night owls by this research. Insulin resistance, higher BMI, greater abdominal obesity, incidences of diabetes, poor glycemic control, prevalent diabetes, and a possible relationship, but they are unsure at this time, with cardiovascular events and high cholesterol levels. And here is the scariest thing that I read out of all of the research that I did. Overall, definite evening types are at a 10% increased risk of all-cause mortality, which means every single way there is to die, you're at a 10% increased likelihood of dying from them. There are 5 different categories that you can fall into when it comes to what kind of chronotype you are. This is where it was really important that I looked at a monozygotic twin study. This is basically twins who were once the same egg. They share 100% of their DNA, and the only things that can affect them differently should be the environmental factors around them. Now, there is previous research into chronotype with identical twins, and they found that self-reporting chronotype is about 50% heritable. So this is a test that you take. It's called the MEQ, and it literally stands for Morningness Eveningness Questionnaire. You can go online and take it yourself. It's made up of 19 questions. I went online and had a little look, and it looks like I'm a moderate evening type. And chances are you might fall bang in the middle. However, if you're watching this video, I feel like you're definitely either going to be a morning type or an evening type. They also noted within this that further bodies of research have supported that evening types are more likely to have poor sleep quality, self-reported mortality, and they are more likely to be novelty seeking, risk takers, narcissists, and have a heightened cardiovascular response to stress. So this study measured 10 different things. It measured sleep quality, negative life events, education, employment, relationship status, affiliation with deviant peers, general health, smoking, drug use, and alcohol. Now, you know I love to bring you guys content that actually is what the research says it is and not just what people read it as. So the first thing I did is went and had a look at how they were measuring all of these things, and did I have any problems with them? The answer was yes, but not enough for it to be a study I just threw away. It was actually pretty good. So the first thing I didn't completely agree with was education. Now, the reason I didn't agree with this is because I don't think education is a measure of intelligence, nor is education a measure of success. Also, because they were measuring education, basically what they did was they asked the participants what was the highest level of education they had. They didn't look at salary. So just because someone went and completed education doesn't mean that they then went on to do something with that degree. I don't believe for a second that it even touches the effects of home life on whether or not you have a good education. I think it massively depends on the environment you're in, your parents' attitude towards education, your financial situation as a child, and all of that stuff. I don't think how far you got in school has much to do with chronotype. So when the results came in, they found that the majority of twins had the same chronotype. They were either both morning types, both evening types, or somewhere in the middle. So the majority of twins had scores which were within 10 points of each other. However, there were cases in the identical twins where one of the twins would have such a different score that they would actually fall in a separate category, which is really promising because it shows that environmental factors clearly play a role in whether you're a night owl or a morning person. So there were 4 main things that were the findings worth discussing within this study. The first is that identical twins were able to have different chronotypes. It was possible. So that is really exciting and really good news, because it means that environment clearly plays a part in something that is so genetically relied upon. To me, it says you have a chance to do something about it. The second big thing worth discussing, and the good news, is that they found that within the data, it wasn't that you're a night owl and therefore you're gonna have negative life experience. It was more that people who have experienced negative things in their life are more likely to become a late chronotype or a night owl. And I'll explain a couple of different ways of thinking. So the first way that they thought about why this might be was linked to poor quality of sleep, which, as you guys know, I called bullshit on as soon as I heard it. So if you have bad life experiences and negative life experiences, they made the link that it is possible that you would lead to have worse sleep because of the trauma of that event. And then having worse sleep would push your biological clock later into the evening and therefore result in you being a night owl. So by that theory, in terms of negative life events, if you can process it, if you can work on it, you might be able to help shift your biological clock back towards the middle or towards the morning. The other way that they thought about it was that if you are a night owl, you already have a genetic overlap. Maybe that gene also means you don't sleep well and you're a poor sleeper. So if you're a poor sleeper, you're more likely to make poor choices, bad decision making, and that's going to lead to more negative life events, which is going to lead to more poor sleep, which again is going to lead to being a night owl. Now, this wasn't listed as a notable finding, but it is a nice little side note. They only made the observation that people who are night owls had lower education. They didn't discuss anything around it. In terms of what I read at the beginning, don't pay too much attention to it. It's your life and it's your choice, and just because you're a night owl or a morning person doesn't mean it's going to be impossible for you to gain an education or be employable and have a good life. Another little side note that they made that wasn't a notable finding but was in their body of results, which is super good, is that poor life choices was linked with poor health. So they basically said that colloquially, that's not a word, colloquially, they are basically saying that the assumption that being a night owl leads to poor general health is a colloquial observation. It is not fact. It's just a trend that we've kind of noticed, and that is that. So throw that one out, get yourself healthy, go out running, have a good time. You're not gonna have all of these insane bad health effects just because you're more likely to be a night owl. The second big finding that they talked about was to do with deviant peers. But one of the things that they underlined towards the end of their discussion around these results was that there was no real research about the level of affiliation with deviant peers, the amount that you would spend time with them. There's no data on that. It was just that there were people that were lawbreakers and rule breakers. There were more of those people in the lives of people who were night owls. Here's a little side note that I was thinking of in my head. If you are somebody who is a rule breaker and who likes to not live life by the rules, not necessarily break the law and end up in jail, but not go to bed on time when you were a kid, keep the lights on, play Game Boy under the covers, if that's your personality, as it was mine, you are going to struggle to be friends with people who are tight-laced rule followers and like to do exactly what they're told for a couple of different reasons. One, they're your friend. You don't want to make them uncomfortable, but being yourself and the way you think about rules and the way you think about life is going to make them uncomfortable. And two, chances are they're probably going to rat you out. That's not a great basis for a lifelong friendship. One of the weird findings that they did find, and we can't really talk much to it, was that even though negative life effects seem to happen to people with late chronotypes, which is based around poor decision making, there also seems to be more negative life experiences observed in late chronotypes that are outside of their control. These are negative life experiences that have nothing to do with choice or behavior. These are just things that have happened. And for some reason, it does seem that there are more of those experiences in people who are night owls. It will be very interesting if we ever get a paper where we can actually understand that relationship. One of the things they talked about in order to explain the alcohol and drug substance abuse and night owls was that night owls are more likely to socialize in the evening. In the evening, where do you go? You go to a pub or you go to a bar where there is a lot more alcohol and drug use and smoking than there is if you decide to go to the garden centre at 9 o'clock in the morning to spend time with your bestie. So that is one of the ways they explained it. They also talked about the possible overlapping of the genes that make up a late chronotype and the genes that are part of the genetic material and molecular pathways for addiction. We know a lot more about addiction now than we used to, and we know that there is a huge genetic component to being an addict. And one of the things that has highlighted this to the researchers, there's a biological marker for circadian rhythm called EER2, and that has also been found to be a biological marker for addiction. And that's where they're thinking that maybe there is a little bit of overlap. Finally, we've got to the end part of this video. We are talking about limitations, but I'm only talking about a limitation in here that I find really interesting, and a few hypothetical situations that you can apply to your own life as to whether you think the way you behave is genetic, environmental, or anything to do with the time you get up in the morning. So one of the things that they were able to control for in this study in childhood was light. So light is a massive part of what time you get up in the morning and what time you go to bed at night. It's also a huge thing to do with when you release sleep hormones, when you actually feel sleepy, and therefore the behaviours you're going to exhibit. All of the participants in this study were from the United Kingdom, and all of them were identical twins. So the good thing is they lived on the same latitude, meaning sunrise and sunset would have been the same. However, within this study, they did not control for whether the twins shared a bedroom or whether they were able to control their own light system, for example. So let's say you have two identical twins and they share the same bedroom. They're told to go to sleep, the light goes off, and their parents know if it goes back on. They are probably more likely to become morning types because they're in a controlled environment. If you take identical twins and you split them up into two different environments, putting them in their own bedrooms, this is where it comes down to personality, I think. I think so much of this is to do with personality and choice, and I think that's really important to remember here. One of the twins decides, yeah, I'm going to bed when mum says lights go off. The second twin says, yeah, okay, I'll turn the lights off for 5 minutes, and then I'm going to play Game Boy under the cover, or then I'm going to text my friends, or then I'm going to turn the lights on and read the end of this book because it's so freaking exciting and I can't wait to see what happens. The kids end up going to sleep 2.5 hours apart. The person who wanted to stay up to read their book is going to end up with a later circadian rhythm and will be more likely to end up being a night owl. Now here's where the rest of the research comes in and why it's so important to think about the big picture. That twin that stayed up and read his book, yes, he's more of a risk taker and he's a bit more impulsive. The other twin that turned the light out, he's had more sleep. They both have to get up for school in the morning. Whether that leads to poor decision making is another thing, but I think it's a choice. I think it's 100% possible that both of those twins go on to have the same level of education, they have the same, I don't know, salary or income, they both have stable relationships. But if the twin who is the risk taker, who stayed up late, applies those risky behaviours to other elements of life, including narcissism within relationships, meaning that his relationships don't last as long, or risk-taking in relationships, cheating, then that leads to poor life choices, then that leads to poor sleep, then that leads to maybe more dependency on alcohol, maybe a choice to smoke, maybe a choice to hang out with people who use hard drugs. Then you can see how that would filter down into employability, and you can see how that would filter down into poor health. So if you are a night owl and you're watching this video and you are worried about your health, there is no genetic marker that has been mentioned in the papers that I have read and the research that I have looked into that genetically predisposes you to be more sick. It's more about life choices and it's more of about lifestyle and your environment around you as to what you do to keep yourself in shape. That's really good news. It's about choice. Thank you so much for tuning in with me on this video. I had the best time learning all about this. I know it was a lot, I know, and I know a lot of you will not still be with me. You'll have stopped watching this video at this point. So thank you so much to the ones who did. If you like this video, please drop a comment in the comment section below. Also tell me things that worked for you, like tell me if you're a night owl and then tell me what things apply to you and what things don't. It'd be really interesting to find out. Drop me a like, drop me a comment. Let me know what video you want to see next, and please, please, please jump on down to that subscribe button. I hope you enjoyed this video and learnt lots from it. Have an amazing rest of your day, and I will see you next week. Bye!